All right, guys, welcome to the 30 podcast. Happy to have Stephen Igoe, publisher, of course, of 247 ECU Media. You're building out quite the media conglomerate there, Stephen, and of course, host of his own radio show, Hoist the Colors, on 94.3. You might hear some chainsaws in the back. I had a tree fall, and it looks like they just started again. Stephen, thank you for joining me. I know this has been a whirlwind time for you, and I'm sure you probably haven't seen your family as much. And you've just done, I think, a tremendous job of covering this baseball season. And I know we're going to talk football and the portal, some of the portal gets, but just kind of your general sense on the weekend and what this team is all about, and a prediction or thoughts about playing Florida.
Yeah, well, first off, Sean, thanks for having me, man. And yeah, we've been trying to get this thing scheduled. I feel like for at least a week or two, and wouldn't you know it, that ECU baseball decided to wake up and win some games, which pushed this back a few separate occasions, which is a good thing. You know, it's never a bad thing to have to change things due to an ECU win. But yeah, it's just been really the regular season was a nightmare in terms of just up and down, inconsistent play, injuries. You know, Cliff Galvin said drama, mess he's had to deal with. And for whatever reason, when they condensed the roster, when they went down to Florida, it really came together. And, you know, getting Riley Johnson back, your Gold Glove, all conference center fielder, not to mention the presence he brings in the lineup, was a game changer. You know, I was telling you before the show, they've got good frontline guys, especially on the mound. And if they can stay on schedule, they could win a regional, just like they won the conference tournament. So all that came together. And look, am I going to put any money on them to advance out of this Conway Regional? No, because I think they would have to prove to me they can do it 2 weeks in a row. Now, if they play like they did in Clearwater, they certainly have a chance with clutch hitting, quality pitching, winning pitches, you know, in key counts where you have to deliver good pitches. So they've shown now they can do that. Yes, the competition will be stiffer, but they also played Coastal Carolina really good earlier this year when they weren't even playing that well. Now, Florida is a juggernaut as far as talent, but they aren't unbeatable. They do play in the SEC. They probably have national championship caliber talent, especially on the mound, especially at the top of their order, but they have been pretty ravaged by injuries as well. So you're getting a somewhat young and inexperienced Florida team in some key spots going into this regional, but their talent is undeniably the best of any team in the region. And so a lot for me depends on what Florida team shows up along with what ECU team shows up. Florida will be favored, I'm sure, to win the game. Coastal's a slight favorite to win the regional, playing at home, and they can really pitch. I just have a weird feeling, though, the Pirates, I made the pick last night on our podcast. I think they're going to have a chance to win the game against Florida. And if they can do that, you know, all bets are off from there, just given what momentum that would give them.
I'm not a baseball guy, and I've started following it a little more closely because of your coverage, but I do enjoy winners, and there's no question. So hats off to that guy, and he's as feisty as ever, but maybe that's what gives him that competitive spirit. So, well, it'll be interesting to watch. It's this Friday on ESPN too, right?
Yep, Friday at noon on ESPN2, Florida and East Carolina from Conway, and that'll be the first game of the regional.
Should be interesting. Guys, it looks like we're having some lag. My apologies. I don't know what's going on with my Wi-Fi. If you're watching on YouTube, please feel free to ask questions or type in a question. We'll tape this. We'll put it on the 247 website. All right, Stephen, let's get right into this. Let's talk a little bit before we get into some of the picks that I think are interesting to talk about. I have some slides I want to show you. Let's talk a little bit about Coach Harrell and his ability to pick players that seem to meet the necessary spots. I think I may have said this on a post. He reminds me of like the 1880s, 1890s riverboat gambler in New Orleans who walks into the card game, completely sort of makes people feel comfortable, but then he's got three aces up his sleeve and nobody's ready for it. I mean, this guy just seems to know which types of players to get. And if you look at who he has picked in the portal, especially in the defensive back arena, I think he has a specific sort of idea of what type of player he's looking for, because if you look at some of the players that we're going to look at, all of these kids sort of fit a type. And given the 4-2-5 that we're running with that nickel, the cornerback and the defensive back and secondary have become more important than ever. But just thoughts about his portal picks so far?
Yeah, it's been kind of a weird offseason with the portal because I feel like they haven't really made waves with any particular player. Like I felt like last year when they added Winston Wright, Hauser, and Garcia, like every one of those additions, along with maybe a few others, were such a big deal. Even Anthony Smith to a smaller degree, and like this year, it's just kind of flown under the radar. But I think they've done a better job in mass as far as like addressing several different needs. And Sean, as you know, as we'll dive into, some of the takes from watching tape and just looking deeper into the numbers, like none of these guys are guys who are going to get, $100,000 to go play in the Big 12 or $200,000 to go play in the SEC, and that's fine. ECU doesn't really need to compete in that arena. Could you go splurge on a player or two? If you need to go get a quarterback, I think ECU could, but I think a lot of the money was spent on retention and paying Yannick Smith, paying – I do know they splurge on, Cooper Trivnaski, the transfer from Newberry College in the winter, because they felt like he was a chance to really solidify the offensive line. They had to splurge on, retaining some of their offensive linemen from a year ago. So I just feel like they did a good job of maybe with limited resources, spreading the wealth to get guys who can fit in the system, that have experience. The biggest difference, not to go down the whole basketball rabbit hole, but like Blake Harrell has done an excellent job of getting guys who have played, for the most part, Division I significant snaps. And like ECU basketball is taking a bunch of transfers who have not played Division I. And anytime you're taking guys who have not played at that level, you're kind of getting an unknown. And yeah, there are certain cases where you have to gamble on a guy going up a level, but usually if they dominate a lower level, there's a pretty good chance they come up and play. But I feel like ECU's done a good job of kind of hitting everything, every position. They seem to feel solid about the defensive line. I know there's some questions there, but internally they feel solid. And then, as you mentioned, the back end they've really addressed here these last few weeks. So I really give them. I don't give them an A+, but I think definite B just on paper, just as far as addressing the needs.
Yeah, I think well said, Stephen. The biggest difference me between Coach Harrell and what Coach Houston was doing is I think Coach Harrell has a better eye for talent evaluation. And I think Coach Houston struggled with that. I clearly wasn't on Coach Houston's staff, but it looked to me that Coach Houston over-relied on his system and thought you could sort of plug in whatever player to the system, and the system was strong enough. What I love about Harrell is he's going after particular sets of talent, and he and Baker are doing, I think, a really good job of looking at tape and saying, hey, this kid can play. And to your point, they're finding kids that have played. These are not kids that are green. They're not raw. And if you look at the DBs, for example, and you look at some of the running backs that they brought in, even some of the linemen, these are all kids that have played. Right. And so somebody is spending some time on film. So talent evaluation, I think, has really been superb. And you know what? This is where Coach Harrell's making his money, right? It's in between the season. It's in the off season. And given the portal and the amount of transition that happens in college football, you have to be ready to make talent evaluation. So let's just get to a question really quickly. Judy G wants to know how many points will ECU need to average to win, 6 or 7? Do you mean, I guess, in a 6 and 7 over the opponent, I guess?
Yeah, I think she's saying 6 or 7 games total. Like, what's your point
to
total
win 6
average?
Or 7 games.
Yeah.
Oh, right.
I think so, is what she's asking.
What do you think?
That's a good question. I want to say you posted it on the board. that you felt like the defense will likely give up more points, which I wholeheartedly agree with. And as a result, the offense is going to have to take a step forward in terms of the points it scored. Now, last year, you won 7 during the regular season. You averaged 32 points a game. Now, that is the totality of that's also including the bowl game. So you have to keep in mind the slower start to the start of the year, where really the offense did not score a ton of points. And so 32 points a game, I think you're going to have to get it to 35-ish. Now, the tougher thing is your schedule is going to be tougher. But I just feel like this offense year 2 with Caden Hauser, John David Baker, how many times did they really get stopped last year, Sean, versus stopping themselves? Like, how many if you take away, you won 8 games and you turn the ball over like an ungodly amount of times at certain points in the season. If you don't turn the ball over, and I think John David Baker made this point during the spring, he's like, man, if we don't turn the ball over, we could average 40 points a game. Now, obviously, you're not going to cut out all your turnovers, but I think if you get into that 35 to 36 point range, you're probably looking at 6-7 wins for sure. That's a lot of points. Defenses are starting to catch up, I think, to some of the offenses in college football, but it's still a very offensive game. So I think you got to see that point total rise to at least the mid-30s, and I think they can get higher if everything comes together.
Yeah, I think we've got to be between 35 and 38 points in order to compensate for the potential for there to be a drop off on the defense. And I think it is conceivable, given the amount of new people that we have. I think it's conceivable that we give up another 7 to 10 points. And I think that would be worst case scenario. I hope it's not worse. We were 82nd or 83rd in points allowed last year. So, for us to continue to sort of dip in the wrong direction is not good. But I think we're going to have to really score and keep scoring, because I think the defense is going to struggle to begin with. I think we've got the players in place. I like some of the offensive line pickups and some of the wide receiver pickups, and Caton has another year in the system, and Baker. So you hope that can happen. Here's second question. Is the new DC going to give us a different look, aggressive and blitzing? What do you think, Stephen? I have my theory on this, but what do you think?
So I think it's going to, just based off the spring, and not that they would, show everything to us media folks to get out there, but I think you're going to see some very similar things. Now, you will see some differences. I think you'll see maybe a touch more blitzing at times, but more so of, Blake loved to bring the house a good amount, 6-7. I think Aldridge, and I could be wrong here because he could go, all out blitz with no safety over the top more times than I expect. But I almost feel like he's a guy who, all right, we want to send 5 here. We're going to bring the nickel here. The next time we're going to bring an inside linebacker. The next time we're going to bring the strong safety down. I think his is more where we bring the extra guy or two from. I do think also they're going to be very aggressive in their sub packages, second long, third and long. They have a lot of different personnel on this defense that do certain things better than others. Like a Sam Danka is more of a pass coverage or blitzing linebacker more so than like a downhill linebacker who's going to go in there and take on a block from a guard getting to the second level and make a tackle. So I think you're going to pick your spots like a KJ Merrill, elite straight line speed. He's a perfect blitzing nickelback. You pick your spots to blitz with him. So I think they've got the personnel to be pretty dynamic, but I do think it is going to be similar to Blake's scheme with that multiple 4-2-5, although you could see more, hey, let's slide a J.D. Lampley inside and let's bring in Julian Davis to rush on one edge. Let's bring in, Raheem Craig to do the other edge, or Kendrick DeJour, the transfer from Sam Houston State, who is an outside linebacker. So I think they have more pieces this year, although they may not have that dominant defensive player, which usually when you do that, Sean, as you know, you got to be aggressive and multiple to kind of keep teams on their toes and create negative plays.
Yeah, well said, Stephen. If you look at DeJour's film, tall, lanky, strong, can set the edge, but also has a really quick step. I could see them trying to utilize him on some type of outside blitz. Remember, Harrell is going to probably have a pretty strong hand in the game plan. So I suspect that the blitzing that we will see will be cautious to begin with so many new players in the secondary. I think they're probably going to want to know who is able to get into the backfield and also not to put too much pressure on the guys in the back until they know what they have. The good news is these kids have all played, but playing together and gelling together makes some blitz packages much more difficult. The reality is, in modern college football, if you don't blitz some of the times, you're just going to get eaten up in the field. So they're going to have some type of blitz package. Let's look at a couple players that we did pick up. Ladarian Polk, interesting guy, right? 3 different schools before he came to us. I wrote down a couple thoughts. This is a kid who is speedy. If you look at his film and coverage, it's clear that he knows what he wants to do on the field. He takes some chances, but his field play shows that he's had some pretty good coaching. And this is a kid that I think can come in and play right away. He started 8 games, I think, at Memphis, and is a kid that once the ball is snapped, his post-snap movement is pretty impressive. I don't know exactly what happened in terms of sort of moving around from school to school, but I think this was a good pickup for us, particularly if we put him in the safety position. What do you think, Steven?
I mean, this is a guy who went to junior college, then he went to Memphis, then he went to FIU. He's from Florida, and then he went to Central Missouri, and then he went to West Florida, and then so like he's been. I guess this is your classic transfer portal player. I think this is a solid depth move. Like, you look at the safety room right now, I feel pretty good about it. But the one thing I said going to the spring, after the spring, was like they just need another guy. They need another guy at nickel. They need another guy at safety, preferably one who has played at both spots. And they went out and did just that. And Polk is a very interesting player because, as you mentioned, his best year came in the American Athletic Conference in 22 with Memphis, 28 tackles that season. Started 8 games, had an injury that season, still played pretty effectively. PFF, Pro Football Focus, graded him out around replacement level, which as a first-year starter at that time, he would have been, a redshirt sophomore or maybe even redshirt freshman. That's, you take that. Memphis was solid that year. So FIU, he goes there. He starts the season opener, plays like 80 snaps. And then I guess he got hurt. He only played 1 snap. In the second game. Did not play again the rest of the year, I believe, until the very end of the season. So, and then you transfer down. And the thing I've learned is when guys go to Division II, unless they just have like all conference accolades, they just get lost because Pro Football Focus, a lot of these coaches, Sean, they'll go through PFF. And they'll say, all right, what guy at the FCS level is grading out really high? All right, I'm going to go after him. I want to look at his film. Well, D2 at Central Missouri, you're not getting any PFF grades. So
absolutely.
Somebody's got to be watching tape of Ladarian Polk. And that's what, obviously ECU did that, had a connection or something. And so I think you get kind of a steal here. Is he going to be an all-conference guy? I highly doubt it. But, I think this is kind of your diamond in the rough. Hey, late spring portal, there's not a ton out there. And ECU, I think, found a guy who's going to come in and help them and can play special teams too, because you always need safeties to play special teams.
Yeah, absolutely. And the other thing too, Stephen, is all of these guys have agents. And I think often what happens is who's the most aggressive agent, who has access to the coaching staff, who knows who. I mean, that's an important world of connections. But if you look at this guy's tape, I think he's going to come in and he's going to put some pressure on the safeties that we have. So I think a good get. I just put his ability to switch and pick, which means that he can switch between the DB and the safety. His post snap movements, I think, are pretty impressive. He covers a lot of ground. He's aggressive. At times he takes unnecessary risks, but that's part of what happens when you have an aggressive safety. And he struggles in leverage coverage. Part of it is some stiff hips, but look, this is a kid that come in and play at a pretty decent level. Let's talk a little bit about Mike Wright, the backup quarterback. This is another journeyman, a fascinating story, right? I wrote down he starts at Vandy. He then went to Mississippi State, played in 12 games, had 3 starts, was at Northwestern most recently, 3 games, started 2 games. What are your thoughts, Stephen?
I think this is, best case scenario for a backup quarterback at East Carolina. Now, we did talk about how they didn't necessarily splurge. I think they spent some money on Mike Wright, which is perfectly fine. They were going to pay Jake Garcia at least $50,000 from what I understand to be the backups, and that's an insurance policy. And in Mike Wright, I think you're not only getting an insurance policy, I think you're getting a guy who is look, I don't have a problem with Jake Garcia, but I just think there was a weird locker room dynamic with Jake Garcia and Katon Houser. They weren't exactly the best of friends. So I think bringing in a guy who is renowned for his, character, locker room presence, all that sort of stuff only is a benefit. And the other thing too is, you're talking about a guy who ran at 22 miles per hour or just shy of that in a, collegiate football game. That's up there with what Keaton Mitchell was able to do when he was at East Carolina. And, is he the best passer of the football? No, but he doesn't need to be. And honestly, at East Carolina, how many ECU teams have we seen struggle stopping a running quarterback, let alone other teams in the American? So, to have this card to play, God forbid if anything happens to Katon Houser, which none of us want that to happen and pray it doesn't, but you at least have an experienced guy who can go in and run the system. He provides a buffer to Raheem Jeter, Chasten Dita, and Cole Hodge. Just an experienced guy who knows what it takes to win. And it sounds like, listen to his interviews, he's all about winning for the team. You look at it, he has not been on the best of teams during his journey. So he probably wants to win as well. And his thing was, all right, well, people keep picking on me. Why do I keep playing college football? Well, he's like, I still have eligibility left and it's fun as hell. So why not? So I think he's in it for the love of the game. Yeah, he's probably getting paid some money, but I think this is a perfect ad. You get experience and a weapon that John David Baker can employ.
Yeah, and I suspect that Baker had his hands all over this one. I had experience, speed, average passer, support for QB1. I think he's going to be great sort of for Houser. And here's the most important part of this, Stephen, and I think you referred to this. Before we got Mike, I really believe watching the spring game, if Houser had gotten injured, the season would have been over. There was really no one that I saw that was ready to play at a QB1 level, the type of level that we needed him to play. Wright changes that. So, again, if God forbid, Houser gets hurt, Wright will come in and will continue to give us a chance. The season's not over if Mike comes in. So great get, surprising get for ECU. We don't usually get kids like this. We'll take him. Drew McLeod, fascinating pick. Another, I think my sense is Baker looked at this as well as Harrell and said, absolutely. Presbyterian kid, you look at his film. I'm afraid to show film because our connection's so bad anyway. You look at his film, this is a kid that I think is almost ready to play from day one. He does a lot of downhill blocking, which is what our offense calls for. If you look at our offense, right, it's a lot. The offensive line is asked to do a lot of downhill blocking, which is blocking for the power game, for inside zone, for ISO. You want strong kids that can move blockers out of the way. So if you look at his film, this is a kid who played in a system where there was a lot of power runs, there was a lot of down blocking, and this was a kid who also in his film did a lot of duo, which is particularly important for inside zone. So he was able to double team the tackle and then move to the next level. I think if you look, the thing that concerns me a little bit is just sort of some coaching issues. And also I think he needs to gain about 10 pounds. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think you summed it up well. And just to clarify, because I called him Drew McClough. Apparently, it is Drew McCullough.
Oh.
And so it doesn't read like that at all. I did interview him, and he mentioned that. So I just wanted to clarify that, as my dogs are barking in the background. You can probably hear them. Drew McCullough from Presbyterian. I think it's the perfect ad because, look, they needed to get somebody who had played center. And again, is this the FBS level? No, but it is the Division I level. And is Presbyterian playing the hardest schedule in the world? No, but he has gone out. He has proven he can be durable. He played an entire season. And he was a redshirt freshman. So he's a guy who not only can help you now potentially, but is a developmental guy, a guy who has played, by the way, that can develop. I think that's critical. And look, we just don't know what the center position holds right now. So another kind of insurance policy, so to speak. He is a little bit small, I think 290, which you can play with at center, but this staff seems to prefer bigger centers.
Yeah.
You look at it, they're moving Bryce Weaver to center in the spring. They moved Darius Bell, another big guard, inside the center in the spring. So those guys are still learning how to snap consistently. Drew McCullough doesn't have to worry about snapping. He knows how to do it. You have Panda Askew, a smaller center. They actually used him more at guard this spring, which I thought was interesting. So you've got some options there, but McCullough is really the only guy who has played because Carson Jones, who it's a shame because he was really looking good early in spring, blew out his knee or patella injury, is probably going to miss the entire season. So you got to find an answer at center because I honestly feel pretty good about the rest of the offensive line, the way it's shaping up.
Yeah, and Stephen, one of the reasons that if I went back and looked at some game play from ECU, and it's pretty clear that what Baker really wanted to do with this inside run game is just what the veer and shoot does, which is forces the defense to make a decision between covering on the outside or loading people in the box. And when the numbers were there, we ran so much inside zone, so much power. And it's clear to me what Baker wants are big kids up front to punish the opposing team for putting 6 players in the box. He just wants to bulldoze them. So that's to me, that's one of the reasons why he wants a bigger center. I put good positional awareness, good combo blocking. He gets to the next level. He needs to add pounds. He plays at a high level. Arm leverage is a work in progress, and he needs some coaching. Let's talk. Okay, Stephen, if I got Drew McCullough's name wrong, go for it. I was going to say Levi Samaya.
I think Levi Samaya is correct, but don't 100% quote me on that.
Okay. Have you had a chance to talk to him?
So I have not talked to him. I have. Obviously, he was in for the spring. I watched him then, and dude, he is massive. And honestly, he is better than I thought he'd be. I was a little concerned about, as you wrote down there, like he's kind of stiff. But he moved better in person than he does on film. Now I still don't know if he's a starter right now, but just another, you mentioned it, Mauler. You want a big dude inside to punish a small, a light box. He would be your guy. Like I almost wonder is he a guy you throw in there in a short yardage situation as a 6th offensive lineman, as that extra tight end, which we saw at times last year near the goal line. Like he would be that guy for me because he's strong as hell and he's massive.
I'm thinking jumbo package, but I at first I looked at his film when he first signed, and I thought this is a developmental player. To get ready for the podcast, I went back and looked at it yesterday. It's actually more encouraging than I thought. He's deceptive. His hips are stiff, but he has excellent leverage with his hands. So when you see him take off, not the fastest step, but once he gets into motion, his hand movement and his hand placement, which is so important for, he does a really good job of arm placement on the inside of the tackle and defensive lineman, which is what you want to do. So it's this interesting combination of stiff hips, but almost like some jiu-jitsu with his hands. And this is a big kid, but this is another kid, all conference from El Camino, another downhill blocker, Stephen, and you're really beginning to see both Baker and Harrell have a vision. And Baker wants these big kids. This is another big kid. This is a kid that can play in the dart position. He can play the dart play, which is the tackle moving and pulling. He can do counter, which is from a guard position. So he can move And so another big downhill blocker, and you really begin to see Baker's sort of strategy here. Let's get to the corners. Jonathan Jean, Rice kid. I believe he was injured at the end of last year. Is that correct, Stephen?
Yeah, he's been pretty banged up. The one thing with Gene, which I'm sure we'll get into, I think he had a shoulder. He played some of the season with I can't remember if it was last season or the year before with a club on his hand, but yet he was still out there playing, making tackles. The Houston game in 23, big rivalry game for Houston Rice. He actually had the pass breakup on Houston's 2-point conversion in overtime to try and tie the game. It was on Matthew Golden. He was playing the slot. Matthew Golden was just taken in the first round after transferring to Texas. So, that was his big moment at Rice. He played a ton that year, and then he dealt with a lot of injuries latter half of that year and last year.
I think when this kid is healthy, in film, it's just so of course, we're seeing the best part, but I wrote down smart player, does a good job playing in position, knows his assignments. He's a physical player, which is probably why he's injured. And he does a good job of tackling the running back. He's not afraid of contact, above average cover skills, understanding of leverage. I thought that I wrote that he often anticipated routes of the slot receiver and has average ability to cover curls and flats, which are the most important route concept. This is another kid, if he stays healthy, he can play in the nickel position. He can come up, make tackles. This is another really quick kid, a Florida kid who probably is looking for a chance to prove himself. This is a kid that you could bring on blitzes. I really like this pickup. And again, it seems to fit the Harrell mold of bringing in physical, smart corners that can play and have a nose for the ball. That's kind of my thought.
Yeah, look, I think he'd be for me, it'd be a surprise to see him not push for the starting nickel spot based on what I hear. Just, they like KJ Merrill and they like some younger guys, but his ability to cover, KJ is more of like your straight line downhill player. Not that he can't cover because he's got good speed, but I think JoJo is just your more natural cover guy. So definitely a big pickup.
Yeah. I lost you there for a minute, Stephen. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Look, I think you and I talked about this at the end of the spring game. I know you were concerned. I was concerned. You looked at the secondary. You saw kids that I think were lost at times. I think you saw kids who simply did not understand the struggled post snap movement. The kids the guys that they have brought in, I think, given a chance, can play pretty quickly. I added the San Renew. Is that correct?
I think it's
Deshaun,
maybe. Yeah, I'm not 100% sure of the pronunciation.
I think this is a kid who is a sort of he comes in. This is a depth player, a kid who probably wants to be here. Big body. If you need to spell someone, but clearly, I think they're looking at him as as help as a backup. Any thoughts on him?
Just I mean, he is a guy they offered a preferred walk-on spot to, as you mentioned, 6'6", 315, massive body, and they really are. It's kind of an interesting scenario where they're not going above the 85 scholarship limit, but they're trying to get as creative as possible with these preferred walk-ons, but also giving them NIL money to supplement it. So they're trying to just add as much depth as possible. And here's another guy, as we've mentioned, has played, albeit at a lower level, and could potentially come in and help the depth, as you mentioned.
Yeah, right on the goal line, right? So got really quickly, Rashid Reason, another defensive back, ODU. This is a California kid, had some success at ODU. Probably another kid with an agent who said, "Look, it's time to leave ODU." And that if you look at his film, plays man and zone concept, strong tackler, good technique, above average recovery speed. Again, another kid that is tough-nosed, another kid that can move, another kid that once the ball is snapped, there's a lot of movement. He doesn't stand still, and good hips. this is a kid who can play. And if you look at his coverage, his PFF grades, I think they were decently high against ECU, App State, and Texas State. But another kid I think that Harrell has designated as someone that can come in and play and really make the secondary competitive, right? Because I don't think, you mentioned this at the beginning, I don't know if these kids are all conference kids, but these are kids that can come in and they compete. They're hard-nosed and they give us a chance, right? I mean, before some of these players got here, I believe that we were looking at some really ugly scores. I don't feel that way right now. I think it's going to take a while for these kids to gel, but these are kids that can come in and play.
And the biggest thing with Rashid is he's coming to a position room where he knows his coach. He played for Teron Williams, who coached in the past few years at Old Dominion. So you've got a guy, if you're Teron Williams, you go through the spring, you're like, man, I don't know what we have at corner. You see the potential at times, but then you see some inconsistent play. So, all right, I'm going to go get Rashid, who I know I can count on for this, this, and this. And like as a coach, you just want to put guys in the game who you can trust. Yeah, like, it's really that simple. And so, like, to get a guy like that who, all right, if we're going to play him 10 yards off the ball and tell him, hey, let's just make sure to keep everything in front of you. I don't care if the guy makes the catch. At times we saw Isaiah Brown-Murray do just that, or other guys who played last year. You just want people you trust and know can get the job done. Not that he can't go out there and make plays, but at the least, he's a adequate corner, if not a little better than that. And as you mentioned, toughness, experience. I love this pickup. I mean, it's just another quality add, and all the transfer corners I think have a shot to play. It's just a matter of who is going to emerge from that group. And Reason, having played for Teron before, I think has kind of an edge going into the summer.
Yeah, and there's no greater compliment when your coach wants you to follow, right? I mean, coaches don't pick kids that they don't want. They don't want kids to follow them that have not played well. So, I'm going to say, okay, Crowell. So let me just say a couple thoughts about this kid. I looked at his film, and you might think I'm crazy, Stephen, but I think that this is a special talent. And if you look at his athleticism on film, he reminds me of Chavon. Right. But this is a kid who's his hip fluidity. If you look at him in coverage, this is a guy that can change on a dime. You look at his time at the University of Indianapolis, 5 interceptions in one season, first team defensive back. The guy had speed. You look at his high school film. He played wide receiver, special teams. I think he was the special teams player of the year for his conference. This is a kid who is going to need some more coaching, but in terms of athleticism, I think is the best of the bunch athletically. All right, you can call me crazy, Stephen.
No, I mean, look, I agree. I think there is a learning curve going from, University of Indianapolis to the American, but like all the traits you talk about, they showed up in the spring. The one reason he probably was overlooked is just he was just small. I mean, he is only 5'11", and he needs to add some muscle. But like all the athletic traits and the competitiveness, you saw it come out towards the end of the spring. There was a late team-on-team practice. I can't remember when, maybe going into the last week of spring ball. But he was guarding some of ECU's best receivers and just he made like 3 plays in one period where it was just like, all right, like you see it now. And I think at the start of spring, I don't want to say he was doubting himself, but he definitely was a little unsure. Like he was slow to react. And like what you said on film, where he's jumping routes and doing the special things that you don't normally see corners do, like that started to show up towards the end of spring. And it's like, I think we're going to see that now going forward. He may give up some plays, that's fine. But I think there's enough playmaking ability there. Like I don't really see a ton of playmaking ability from the rest of the corners. Whereas Key, I think he has the potential to be like, the pick 6 guy, so to speak, or a guy who's going to make those types of plays.
Totally agree. I think the other people will do workman-like jobs in their positions. I think there are upgrades by and large of what we had or close to upgrades. I think Key is the kid that has the potential, right, to really be the kid that goes out and has sort of these game-changing sort of moments. Really quickly, Kendrick DeJour, thoughts on him, and then we'll do a quick wrap up.
Yeah, Kendrick, honestly, it's kind of he was exactly what we thought he was. So when they recruited him from the portal, I mean, he showed up in spring. He was the pass rush guy. Now he did the one valuable thing for Kendrick was with Raheem Craig. He was banged up for a lot of the spring. He probably could have practiced if he needed to, but they moved some guys. They moved like Jackson Barker and Danka off rush. So with Craig banged up, DeJour was basically the number one rush linebacker for the entire spring. So those were huge reps for him. He is a pass rush guy, and he as you mentioned, tall and lanky. And honestly pretty physical. Like he doesn't look, he looks almost more like a receiver than a defensive end or outside linebacker. But like when he lines up in his defensive stance, he's not going to lack away from hitting you in the mouth. So like I think he plays more physical than he looks. But his calling card definitely with the length is getting after the passer. I think he's going to be more of a situational pass rusher. I think you'll see him and Craig on the field at the same time in certain packages, and Danka. So, I mean, you're going to have a ton of length out there. And then, JD Lampley also coming back from injury. I think you'll have some legitimate pass rushers, but he is definitely a pass rusher through and through.
Yeah, I totally agree about his physicality. I was surprised on film because a lot of times these tall guys they specialize in rushing. This is a guy who set the edge quite a bit. He got into the face of the defensive of the tackles, surprisingly, quite a bit. So this is a physical kid who another really good pickup. A solid pickup. And so I really, my hat's off to Coach Harrell and his staff, because somehow these agents are getting through to them and they're doing their homework on these kids. They really are. Just some final notes. Put the secondary now has a chance to be competitive. We didn't talk about Lowry, but I thought he had a pretty good spring game. Gene Polk, Rasheed, and we didn't talk about Atkins. That's the Maryland. Yeah,
he had a
pretty
solid
decent.
spring.
Yeah, quick guy. I could see him running back punts. Viable QB2, online quality pickups with Drew and Cooper. Even Dayson can be plugged in from time to time. Staff has done an excellent job in finding the right guys for position of needs. I think we need some linebacker and maybe a little more safety help, although I think more so the linebackers. What do you think, Steven?
Yeah, I mean, I think you pretty much nailed it. And, the linebacker question and the defensive line is, I think there's a lot of people outside the building that have uncertainties about those positions, and I can understand why, because there's really very little proven talent at those spots. I mean, the biggest thing with inside linebacker, especially now, is you lost Zakai Barker, who was the heartbeat of your defense. We all know what they lost on the defensive line. You also lost Mike Edwards at inside linebacker. So you lost a ton of snaps in your front group. Now, they feel confident. You look at Zion Wilson, Preston Card, two guys who were former walk-ons who are now getting some money. Xavier McIver coming back. I think they feel pretty good about the D-line when you throw in Rose Pearl and you throw in Justin Benton and a couple of redshirt freshmen. I mean, that's 7 interior D linemen right there, plus some defensive ends. And the inside linebacker, a lot of it comes down to what does Sam Danka and Jackson Barker look like as inside backers? We know they can play outside backer. That is a change. And then, we've kind of seen the last few years the next guy in line take the step at inside linebacker is Damian Wilson. Is he ready for that full-time job? He had a really good spring. What about DJ Johnson? Like you would talk about a dude who's going to hit you in the mouth. He is a shorter linebacker, but he doesn't mess around, man. He is going to hit you and hit you hard. He only knows one speed. And then you got some younger linebackers too. So linebacker, I think, is a little bit of a concern. And I think they tried to add a guy there, but there just wasn't really a home run or a guy that they felt was the best fit. And so I think they're going to roll with what they have, and they feel decent about it. I know they feel good about the D-line, and, we'll have to see how it plays out.
Yeah, and I think if you look at the strategy of Harrow, at least in bringing in these defensive backs, because all of these backs can tackle, all of these backs are physical, and so many teams now are running sort of a nickel position, a 4-2-5-ish. The better teams that run that defensive formation have corners that can tackle, have corners that can come up. and get to the line of scrimmage. And each of the kids that we brought in can do that. So although I'm worried about the linebackers, it's not like it used to be where, you had a 3-4 and you absolutely had to have backers that could make the tackles. You need them in the right, stopping some of the gap game. But as long as you have some corners that can come up, we can sort of make up for average linebacker play. Then my final thought on the D-line, when I saw them play at the spring game, I was at first worried, but the more I saw them play, that's a scrappy group. That's a group that started really getting after the ball, and I felt much better about their physicality and their ability to gel once the season starts.
I mean, go ahead. I was just going to add, like, this defense, I just don't – I don't know if they're going to have many standout players, but I think they can be – better than the sum of their parts, if that makes any sense. Like, I just feel like some of the experience, and I guess if you had to point to the standouts, you could have it. I think JD Lampley could have an all-conference year. Like, he gets the pressure. The problem with JD is he's got to finish these sacks because he's constantly in the backfield. But outside of that, I just don't see a guy who's going to like take over a game, which is fine. Like, if your system's good and you trust the people in your system, you can still be good. And at the end of the day, this system is in a lot of cases going to be about fooling the offense, keeping them on their toes, making them hesitant, and that leads to TFLs, sacks, and turnovers, and that's how you win football games.
Absolutely, and I think we've just got to stretch because everybody wants to stretch the field, and we've just got to stop the stretch enough that the offense can score points, right? And I think we've got enough player combinations post-spring with some of the add-ons that can make us competitive enough, that can fit the scheme, that will provide enough stop on the defensive side that we won't have to score 50 points per game, right? Now, I say that, and we'll just have to score 50 points per game. But if hopefully we can keep it in that 35, 38 point, margin. But we're going to see, right? I think the defense is going to struggle to begin with, just putting all these players into place and getting them used to each other. But hopefully 4 or 5 games in, we'll have a better idea of what's there. Final thoughts, Stephen?
You would like this to be the year you open with Campbell or whoever, not open at NC State. But at the same time, when the line came out for that game, we posted the spread, which NC State was favored by 2 touchdowns or so. And Raheem Craig was one of the first to comment on Instagram with some laughing emojis. So, like, I think it motivates the players. It gives them something to look forward to. And I think this team, like, for the first time in a while, East Carolina feels like it has its swagger back. Like, that Military Bowl victory meant so much to the fan base. And at spring practice, it just feels like ECU football again. Blake has an intensity to him.
He does.
But he's got like the right blend of relax to him as well. He's just such an easy guy to be around. The players are themselves, and I think it just fits ECU. There's not that uptight feeling anymore. It just feels like ECU football is kind of back. I'm still not going to say we're all the way back, but it just feels better than it used to in most recent memory.
Agree. And Baker's wily. I'm interested to see him in his second season. He really has a sense of what he wants on that offense. And so you've got 2 really smart, crafty coaches who, could be the difference in sort of gelling this team. So, Stephen, I know this has been a crazy baseball season and a crazy 2 weeks. Thank you so much for joining my podcast. And as always, I love talking ball with you and love hearing about your knowledge of ECU football. So thank you so much. He, of course, is Stephen Igoe, host or owner of the 247, publisher of 247 website, ECU, and of course, host the Hoist the Colors Daily radio show on 94.3. Thank you, Stephen. Hey, guys, I'll publish this online. Take care.